In the dead of a Montana winter, when the world was buried under miles of snow and even the stars hid behind the storm, a single German shepherd shattered the silence of a hospital lobby, dragging half a broken wheelchair behind him. No one knew where he came from or who he belonged to. All they saw was urgency in his eyes and purpose in every breath, as if he carried a message no human could speak. What happened next became the story that changed an entire town and proved that miracles sometimes arrive on 4 paws. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from. Drop a comment to let us know and settle in for a journey born from courage, loyalty, and the quiet power of love. Winter had a way of swallowing Briar Ridge whole, as if the small Montana town were nothing more than a fragile carving resting in the palm of a giant frost-covered hand. The blizzard that night moved like an ancient creature, slow, heavy, and merciless, its breath blowing snow sideways across shuttered storefronts and empty streets. Roofs sagged under white weight, street lamps flickered like tired guardians, and the world, beneath that icy silence, felt paused, holding its breath. The Briar Ridge General Hospital sat at the northern edge of town, a modest 2-story brick building whose windows glowed faintly gold against the storm. Inside, warmth hung thick in the air, though not quite enough to banish the exhaustion of those trapped in long shifts. The night staff consisted mostly of 2 nurses, a security guard asleep against his hand, and Dr. Elise Porter, whose silhouette, lean, composed, quietly resilient, moved between the nurse station and patient rooms like a steady metronome of responsibility. Elise, 34, carried herself with the kind of grace that came from years of surviving both chaos and disappointment. She had warm brown eyes, the kind that always looked a little tired but never unkind, and a calm voice shaped by a childhood spent caring for a sick mother. That early responsibility had chiseled her into someone who put others first, often to her own detriment, and who found comfort in order when life insisted on unpredictability. In the dim hospital lobby, she stood reviewing charts while cradling a half-empty cup of coffee that had long since cooled. She was about to discard it when the world outside the glass doors erupted. A burst of wind slammed the entrance open, flinging snow across the floor like a wave crashing into a shoreline. And through that frigid chaos charged a creature, dark, drenched, and determined. A German shepherd, but not merely any dog. This one carried the storm with him. The dog was large for his breed, perhaps 6 or 7 years old, with a strong, square muzzle, deep amber eyes full of fierce intelligence, and a coat of black saddle fur that looked almost blue under the fluorescent lights. Snow clung to him in icy clumps, and every step left a melting trail behind him. Around his neck was a worn tactical collar with a faded service tag. Strapped to him by a military-grade leather harness was half of a broken wheelchair frame, lodged awkwardly against his flank where the other half had snapped. The nurses gasped and leaped back, alarmed. The dog, Sable, ignored them all. He ran several steps into the lobby, stopped sharply, and barked in short, disciplined bursts. Not panicked, not wild, rhythmic, intentional. Elise blinked hard. "That's not random barking," she murmured. Before she could speak further, a figure walked forward from near the reception desk, broad-shouldered, tall, the kind of man who made his presence known just by exhaling. Officer Noah Garrett, 38, night, bull. Duty because all patrols outside city limits had been shut down. Noah had the rugged features of someone built from stubbornness and hard seasons. Short dark hair, a jaw lined with faint stubble, and steady blue eyes that carried a shadow of old battlefields. He had served 2 tours in the Army before returning to Montana to build a quieter life. Though most nights the quiet refused to feel earned, his personality balanced between dry humor and old-fashioned protectiveness, and he was the sort of man who checked every door twice before locking up. When he saw Sable, he froze. That bark pattern, "You've been trained, search and alert style." Sable barked twice, stepped backward, then tugged the half-wheelchair frame forward until it screeched softly on the tile. Noah lowered himself to one knee, inspecting the metal. He brushed away the snow, revealing a serial sticker he recognized instantly. Elise's eyes widened at the same moment. "That wheelchair belongs to Arthur Kane," she said, her voice tightening. "I treated him last month. Heart condition, severe tremors. He lives alone." Elise felt a prick of dread crawl up her spine. Arthur Kane, 73 years old, thin as winter branches, a Marine veteran who had retreated to a cabin near Winterglass Lake after losing his wife decades earlier. A quiet man with kind eyes that always seemed to be waiting for something that never returned. Noah examined the snow crusting the metal. This isn't melted. Whatever happened, it was recent. One nurse stepped forward nervously. Do you think he's hurt? Out there? Noah didn't answer immediately. He looked at Sable instead. The dog's ears were pricked sharply, eyes locked on the officer, posture speaking in ways language never could. The dog barked once, then turned toward the door, tail stiff, waiting. Noah stood. He's showing a lead-the-way gesture. We train K9s for that in the field. Elise crossed her arms tightly as if shielding herself from a truth she didn't want to admit. Arthur won't survive long in this temperature. If he collapsed somewhere out there, then we follow the dog, Noah finished. The security guard, finally awake, shook his head. Sir, the road to Winterglass is closed. Plows can't even get through. Noah grabbed his coat from the nearby rack. I'm not taking the road. I'm taking the path Sable came from. Elise hesitated, her heart warring between fear and instinct. Let me check the map, she said quickly. She pulled up the topographic layout on her tablet, hands trembling slightly. There's only one access path from Winterglass Cabin that isn't fully buried under snow yet. If the storm continues, it'll vanish in less than an hour. Noah tightened the straps of his winter jacket. Then I don't have an hour. Elise touched his sleeve. Be careful. Arthur, he doesn't have anyone else? Noah offered a faint, tired, half smile, the kind that said he understood, the kind that said he would still go. He crouched one more time, adjusting the strap tangled around Sable. All right, soldier, he murmured, take me to him. Sable gave a soft, urgent rumble in his throat, then bounded through the open doors into the raging white outside. Noah followed, disappearing into the blizzard with only the beam of his flashlight cutting briefly through the dark before being swallowed by the storm. Elise stood at the door long after they were gone, her breath fogging the glass, wondering how much the world could change because one dog refused to give up. Outside, the night howled, but somewhere within it, a single trail of paw prints carved a path into the unknown, toward a cabin, a fallen veteran, and a story that had only just begun. The storm thickened as Officer Noah Garrett followed Sable past the hospital's awning and into the white wilderness beyond Briar Ridge. Snow hammered the ground in relentless sheets, disguising every familiar landmark beneath a shifting blanket of white. The town lights behind him dimmed quickly, swallowed whole by the curtain of winter. Ahead, the world narrowed into a tunnel carved only by his flashlight and the unwavering silhouette of the German shepherd bounding through the drifts. Noah's breath came out harsh and visible, frosting over his scarf. The cold bit at every piece of exposed skin, slipping into his gloves and crawling up his sleeves like a living thing. Sable, however, pushed forward with the determination of a creature whose loyalty overpowered weather itself. The dog moved with purposeful energy, stopping occasionally to check a scent buried beneath the snow or adjust direction based on memory. Noah understood the behavior immediately. He had once worked with canines overseas, long before he traded desert sand for Montana snow. That experience allowed him to read Sable as clearly as a map. The quick sniffs to the left were uncertainty, the longer pause meant a confirmed direction, the single backward glance meant, hurry, follow me now. Noah admired the dog's intelligence as much as he depended on it. Without Sable, the forest path would have been invisible. The trail from Briar Ridge to Winterglass Lake was a narrow logging road most locals avoided during winter. Tonight, it was buried nearly knee-deep in snow and almost indistinguishable from the surrounding terrain. Noah marched behind Sable, stepping in the dog's tracks when possible to conserve energy. The wind roared through the trees like the low moan of some ancient beast. It rattled branches, spraying icy powder everywhere, and occasionally dropping clumps of frozen snow right onto the officer's shoulders. He brushed them off with a grunt each time. You better know where you're going, buddy, he muttered, though there was no anger in his voice, only a strange trust he couldn't fully explain. After nearly 20 minutes of trudging, the forest opened into a clearing where the snow lay smoother, untouched by anything but the storm. Far ahead, barely visible through the white veil, sat a lonely shape, a cabin, small, wooden, with a sagging roof and porch light that remained dark. Arthur Kane's home. The place looked like a relic forgotten by the world, a stubborn holdout against the ruthless winters of Montana. Sable bolted toward it without hesitation, barking once as though announcing their arrival. Noah quickened his steps. Despite the cold numbing his hands, he unsnapped the safety strap on his holster, force of habit, never certainty of danger. As he reached the porch, the first thing he noticed was the door. It hung crookedly open, banging softly against the frame each time the wind shoved at it. Snow had blown inside, scattering across the floorboards like pale sand. The officer's stomach tightened. A veteran like Arthur Kane didn't leave his door open, not even in summer. Sable disappeared inside with a low whine. Noah followed. The cabin interior was dim, illuminated only by the faint light from his flashlight beam and the swirling snowflakes that drifted through the doorway. The air smelled of old pine, cold ashes, and something metallic. Blood? No, not blood. Medical sweat, perhaps. The scent of fear lingering in a room. "Arthur?" Noah called, voice echoing off the wooden walls. No answer. Sable's bark echoed from the left. Noah swept his flashlight toward the sound and found the old man lying on his side beside a fallen wheelchair. Arthur Kane, 73, looked far too fragile against the harsh timber floor. His white hair was matted with frost, his skin pale like parchment. His frame was wiry, thinned by age, but his face, lined, weathered, dignified, still held the trace of the Marine he had once been. A faint tremor gripped his left arm, and his breath came in shallow, uneven drags. Noah dropped to his knees beside him. "Arthur, can you hear me?" Sable lowered his head, pressing his muzzle gently against the man's cheek, letting out a soft, urgent whimper. Noah checked the pulse at Arthur's neck, weak, thready, but present. The officer felt the cold radiating from the man's clothes. Hypothermia was already sinking its claws in. Worse, Arthur's face drooped slightly on one side, a classic sign of a minor stroke. "All right," Noah breathed, speaking more to himself than the unconscious man. "We can work with this. We can fix this." He tried his radio, but it crackled with static. Winterglass Lake had always been notorious for dead reception. Tonight was no exception. Noah knew he couldn't rely on backup. He had to move Arthur himself. He scanned the cabin, searching for anything that might help. An old wool blanket hung over a rocking chair. A coil of rope rested near the woodpile. A portable lantern, half buried in gear. In the corner, leaning against the wall, was a battered wooden sled board, the kind people used years ago for hauling supplies through deep snow. It was scratched, weathered, and missing one of its side rails, but it was wide enough to support a man. Perfect. Sable followed him anxiously as he gathered the blanket and rope. The dog paced in small circles, nudging Arthur's shoulder with quiet distress. Noah knelt again and worked quickly, wrapping the old veteran in the blanket and securing it with the rope, careful to keep Arthur's head supported. Then came the hardest part, lifting him. Despite his thin frame, dead weight was always heavier than it looked. Noah braced himself, slid his arms under Arthur, and lifted with a grunt. His muscles burned immediately, but he managed to lower the man onto the sled. Snowflakes drifted through the doorway and landed on Arthur's blanket. Sable shook his fur and planted, himself at Noah's side, watching every motion. "You're going to help, right?" Noah muttered, "at least by not getting under my feet." Sable responded with a single, offended huff. Noah smiled weakly. "Thought so." He tied the sled's front rope around his waist, securing a knot that he hoped would hold. Then he turned to the cabin door, staring at the blizzard waiting outside like a living wall. The path back was uphill. The snow was deeper than before. He had no guarantee that the ambulance would even see his signal through this storm, but leaving Arthur here meant death. There was no other choice. "Let's go, Sable," he said quietly. The shepherd moved to the front, nose lowered to the ground, searching for the safest route. He barked once, ready. Noah leaned forward, pulled the sled, and stepped into the storm. The cold slammed into him like a wave. The wind howled around them, clawing at his coat and pushing against him with every step. The sled dragged heavily behind, its wooden base scraping over hidden ice and deepening drifts. Sable did not pull the weight, no dog could, but he moved ahead, weaving left and right, avoiding thin patches of ice, choosing the cleanest line through the terrain. More than once he doubled back to nudge Noah when the officer slowed, as if reminding him that giving up was not permissible. Inch by inch, minute by minute, they carved their path through the storm. After what felt like an hour, though Noah knew it had only been about 40 minutes, he spotted a faint glow through the white curtain, the distant reflection of headlights fighting through the snow. Elise must have sent the ambulance early. Relief washed over him as he raised his flashlight and began signaling with frantic, practiced movements. The beam cut briefly through the storm, then again. A horn responded. They had been seen. The ambulance lights sliced through the swirling darkness like twin beacons of mercy. Red and white glimmers refracted through the wind-driven snow. Officer Noah Garrett had never been so relieved to see headlights. He tightened his grip on the sled rope cinched around his waist and trudged the final yards through the drift, breath ragged, legs shaking from effort. Sable, coat plastered with frost, trotted ahead, barking short, guiding bursts to make sure the paramedics noticed them. The vehicle rolled to a stop, tires grinding against the icy earth, and two figures burst from the rear doors. A tall paramedic with sandy hair named Mark Kingsley, and his partner, a younger woman named Dana Ruiz, whose slight frame hid the sharp competence of someone intimately familiar with crisis. Mark was in his early 40s, big-shouldered and perpetually wind-flushed, with an air of warmth that made patients instinctively trust him. He had worked as Briar Ridge's lead paramedic for over a decade, and despite the demands of the job, he maintained an easy, good-natured humor that softened the harsh edges of many winter emergencies. Dana, 27, was more reserved, focused, precise, the kind of person whose steady hands and quiet determination had saved more than a few lives. Her dark hair was tied in a tight braid under her hood, and her brown eyes scanned the scene with an intensity that left nothing unnoticed. When she saw Arthur Kane's pale face wrapped in the wool blanket on the sled, her expression flickered with alarm before she shifted into action. Hypothermia and possible stroke, Noah said, voice hoarse from the cold and exertion. Unconscious for at least... We'll take it from here, Dana said gently but firmly, already kneeling beside Arthur. Mark joined her, helping lift the veteran onto a collapsible stretcher. Sable hovered anxiously, trying to get close enough to sniff Arthur's face, but Mark gave him an understanding nod. You got him this far, boy. Let us handle the rest. The shepherd whimpered but obeyed, pacing in tight circles as if needing to burn off the fear still clinging to him. Noah stepped back, pulling down his scarf and gulping frigid air into lungs that felt bruised. Snow collected on his eyebrows, his eyelashes, his shoulders. He didn't realize how exhausted he looked until Dana glanced up at him and said, "You're freezing. Get in the ambulance once we load him." "I'm fine," he insisted, out of habit more than honesty. Sable nudged his leg, as if seconding Dana's assessment. "I said I'm fine," Noah muttered to the dog. Sable stared unimpressed. They loaded Arthur carefully, securing the straps around his torso and legs. Dana placed an oxygen mask over his mouth, then pulled out medical supplies with swift efficiency. "Pulse is weak," she said. "Breathing shallow, blood pressure low." Mark nodded. "Let's get moving." Noah lifted Sable into the back of the ambulance. Mark had already given a soft, approving gesture, understanding instinctively that taking the dog away from the man might worsen Arthur's condition. Sable curled immediately near the stretcher, resting his head against Arthur's shrouded legs. As the ambulance began the slow trek back toward Briar Ridge General Hospital, Noah sat across from Sable and Arthur, letting the heater thaw the stiffness from his fingers. Dana worked methodically, administering warm IV fluids and monitoring Arthur's vitals, while Mark drove with the concentration of a man navigating a survival course. The journey felt endless, but eventually the golden glow of the hospital windows cut through the storm. Inside, Dr. Elise Porter was waiting, scrub top rumpled from frantic preparation. Her face lit with a mixture of relief and fear when she saw Noah step through the doors with Sable in the stretcher. "You found him?" she whispered. Noah nodded. "Barely." Elise touched Arthur's arm gently. "Let's get him into ICU." They rushed him down the hall, weaving through hushed corridors and sleepy nurses who suddenly snapped into motion. ICU was small but immaculate, with soft monitors and warm lighting designed to provide a sense of peace that contradicted the urgency unfolding inside its walls. Elise, now the leading physician on duty, worked with the precision of someone who had trained for moments exactly like this. She directed the team, warming blankets, oxygen adjustments, stroke assessment, vitals stabilizing. Sable was allowed to stay, though he was positioned at the corner of the room to avoid crowding the staff. He lay there quietly, eyes locked on Arthur, ears flicking every time someone spoke his name. Only after 30 minutes did the storm of activity settle. Machines beeped steadily. Arthur's breathing, though labored, had a rhythm again. Noah leaned against the wall, tension draining from him. Elise approached, brushing back a stray strand of blonde hair that had escaped her bun. "He's alive," she said softly. "Weak, but alive. Hypothermia and a minor stroke. If you'd found him any later—" She didn't finish the sentence. "Sable found him," Noah replied. "I just followed." Elise glanced at the dog, her expression softening. "Then we owe that boy more than one thank you." Hours passed. Snow piled higher outside the windows. Nurses drifted in and out. Noah dozed in a chair, boots still wet, hands still half numb. Sable never once closed his eyes. He simply stared at Arthur, chest rising and falling in a quiet rhythm, as if he were guarding the man's dreams. Near dawn, Arthur stirred. His eyelids fluttered. His fingers twitched beneath the blanket. Noah and Elise straightened immediately. Slowly, painfully, Arthur opened his eyes. Confusion clouded them at first, then recognition, then emotion. His gaze shifted to Sable. A tear slid from the corner of his eye. His voice was barely a rasp. "You found help." Sable rose, walked to the bedside, and pressed his head gently into Arthur's palm. Elise adjusted the oxygen mask slightly. "Mr. Kane, you're safe. You're in the ICU. You had a stroke, but we're treating you." Arthur nodded faintly, though speaking exhausted him. His eyes turned toward Noah. "Thank you, officer." "No need for that, sir," Noah replied quietly. Elise stepped aside, giving Noah a moment to speak. The officer hesitated, not out of discomfort, but because something about Arthur's expression held layers he didn't yet understand. That understanding came moments later when Elise returned holding a folder thick with military documents and medical notes. "There's something you should know," she said, voice gentle, "about Arthur and about Sable." She handed Noah the file. Inside were photos of a younger Arthur Kane standing tall beside a Marine K-9 handler, Captain Lucas Kane, his son. Lucas was broad-shouldered with dark hair and a confident grin, the type of young man built for dangerous missions. Several photos showed him with a German shepherd, Sable, younger but unmistakable. Elise explained softly, "Lucas served 2 tours in Afghanistan. His unit was hit during a night raid. Lucas was killed. Sable disappeared in the chaos." Noah looked at the dog, now resting his head near Arthur's arm, and saw the years in his eyes. Years lost, wandering, surviving. Elise continued. 3 years. No one knew if Sable lived, until he showed up at Arthur's cabin. Arthur's weak voice rasped. Lucas told him, "Never stop protecting the weak." Sable raised his head, as if understanding every word. Arthur reached trembling fingers toward the dog's fur. And he didn't. Noah swallowed hard. As a veteran himself, he knew too well the pain of losing comrades, the heavy, unfinished silence they left behind. He looked at Arthur, at the dog, at the storm still raging outside, and understood that tonight wasn't just a rescue, it was a return. It was a reunion written by loyalty itself. Morning in Briar Ridge did not arrive gently. It seeped in slowly like warmth returning to a frostbitten limb. The blizzard had weakened, but had not surrendered entirely. Snow still drifted lazily from the clouds, settling onto rooftops and softening the hard lines of the waking town. The hospital's windows glowed against the lingering cold, painting the snow in faint amber where light pushed through. Inside the ICU room, Arthur Kane slept under the gentle rhythm of machines, his breathing steadier, his skin warmed by blankets and heating pads. Sable lay curled beneath the bed, half alert, half asleep, responding to every shift in Arthur's breathing with the vigilance of a guardian carved from instinct. Officer Noah Garrett sat near the window, watching the storm ease. The exhaustion from the rescue still clung to him like residue, but his mind remained awake, turning thoughts over one by one. There was something about seeing Arthur and Sable reunited. something that reached into a quiet part of himself he rarely visited. Dr. Elise Porter, wearing fresh scrubs and a cardigan to fend off the hospital chill, entered softly. Dark circles under her eyes suggested she had slept no more than an hour. "You're still here," she said, voice warm but tired. Noah shrugged. "Didn't feel right leaving." Elise checked Arthur's vitals, reviewed the chart, and finally allowed herself a breath of relief. "He's improving," she said. "Slowly but steadily. We'll keep him here until his neurological readings are fully normalized." Sable lifted his head as if understanding her tone, then rested it again. Elise smiled faintly. "That dog hasn't moved from that spot." "He's loyal," Noah said. "Too loyal to lose someone else." Elise leaned against the counter, fingers curling around a warm mug of tea. "You know, what happened last night? It's more than just a rescue story. It's the kind of thing this town needs." Noah raised a brow. "A miracle?" "Hope," she corrected. "People forget what that looks like." She hesitated before adding, "Especially our veterans." Noah exhaled slowly. He knew she was right. He had seen too many men come home with invisible fractures, loneliness, grief, old trauma that never settled. Arthur was hardly the only one. Elise continued, "There are dozens of former service members in Briar Ridge. Many of them live alone. Many of them struggle with PTSD or isolation or disabilities from their years in uniform. Some are like Arthur, independent to a fault, never asking for help until it's almost too late." Noah turned that thought over in his mind. Images flickered, the silent houses sprinkled across the outskirts of town, the veterans who rarely came to community events, the faces he recognized from welfare checks or quiet conversations at the diner. "What Sable did," Elise said softly, "is something trained canines do instinctively. They find, they protect, they anchor people in moments when they're slipping. That bond is healing in ways medicine can't replace." Noah looked at Sable, the dog's flank rising and falling in steady waves. "Sable's exceptional," he said, "but he's not the only dog out there with that potential." That was the spark. The idea clicked into place as naturally as breathing. Noah felt it settle in his chest, simple, obvious, but powerful. "Elise," he said slowly, "what if we could recreate this? Not the storm or the emergency, but the bond." Elise blinked. "Recreate? Paired companionship," Noah said, leaning forward. "Trained dogs, retired canines, or dogs with basic discipline, matched with veterans, seniors, or anyone dealing with PTSD or isolation. A program, structured, monitored, supervised." Elise's eyes widened as the idea caught fire in her mind. "You mean an initiative?" "Guardian pause," Noah murmured, "because that's what they are." Elise placed a hand on her chest, overwhelmed for a moment by the beauty in its simplicity. "Noah, that could change lives." Noah shook his head. "It's just a thought, maybe unrealistic." "No," Elise said firmly, "not unrealistic, ambitious, necessary." Her excitement softened into something more thoughtful. "But it needs planning, funding, medical oversight, behavioral training." "We can do that," Noah said. "You, me, the station. And there are retired handlers in town, even a few breeders who train working dogs." Elise nodded, thinking through the logistics as only a doctor accustomed to triage decisions could. 8-week pairing cycle, medical evaluations, psychological screenings, dog temperament tests, follow-up assessments. She smiled. "It's feasible, hard, but feasible." Noah felt an unexpected warmth in his chest, pride, maybe, or the weight of a purpose forming. "Then let's present it to Chief Rowan. If we start small, just test with a handful of dogs, we might get the town behind it." Elise's smile widened. Sable could be the face of the program. At his name, the shepherd raised his head, ears perked as if instantly volunteering for the job. Elise laughed. "He agrees." Later that afternoon, with the storm finally weakening into flurries, Noah left the hospital to speak with the police chief. Chief Rowan, a grizzled officer in his 50s with a voice that always sounded like it had been sharpened on gravel, listened intently. Rowan had a tough exterior, but he cared deeply about Briar Ridge. Losing officers or veterans gnawed at him long after incidents were resolved. When Noah explained the concept, pairing trained or adoptable dogs with veterans and elderly residents, Rowan rubbed a hand over his beard. You're serious about this? Yes, sir. You realize how much paperwork this'll mean? Yes, sir. Rowan leaned back, studying him, then broke into a rare grin. Then you better be ready to run it, because I'm approving it. Noah allowed himself a breath of relief. Elise handled the hospital administration. Within hours, a working group was formed. Funding began with small allocations and donations. Volunteers offered to help. A kennel in the next county agreed to loan several retired working dogs. And when Arthur Kane, stabilized and slowly regaining strength, was informed of the idea, tears filled his tired eyes. Lucas would have loved this, he whispered. Sable too. The next morning, Arthur agreed to let his cabin serve as the temporary trial site for the program, at least for the first sessions, once he recovered enough to return home. It's quiet, he said. Peaceful, and Sable knows the place. So it began. Within a week, 3 dogs arrived for evaluation. A young German shepherd with eager, untested intelligence, a sharp-eyed Belgian Malinois retired due to a minor hip injury, and a mellow Labrador used in therapy work. Noah and Elise stood beside Arthur, who sat in a wheelchair but looked stronger than the day they found him. Sable stood at his side like a commander overseeing new recruits. This could work, Noah whispered. Elise squeezed his arm, grounding the moment. It will work. Beyond the frost-covered trees, the sun finally broke through, scattering warm light across the snow. Faint, hopeful, like the beginning of something new. Winter loosened its grip on Briar Ridge slowly, as though reluctant to surrender. Snowdrifts still curled against porches and storefronts, and the pines along the ridge wore their white coats like solemn guardians of the season. But the sky had brightened. The air felt different, lighter, hopeful, carrying the faintest promise that spring would one day arrive. On the edge of the town square, a large canvas banner billowed in the cold breeze. Guardian Pause. Initiative Community Celebration. Beneath it stood folding chairs, camera equipment, a small stage, and 3 wooden platforms covered with paw print blankets. Residents drifted into the square, stamping snow from their boots, faces wrapped in scarves, breath clouding the morning light. Children tugged their parents excitedly, their mittened hands waving colored drawings of dogs. Elderly veterans in heavy coats gathered near the stage with quiet dignity, some accompanied by the newly paired canines who had become their companions over the past 8 weeks. For the town of Briar Ridge, a place that had grown accustomed to silence, aging, and winter's wait, the event felt like a heartbeat returning after too long. Officer Noah Garrett stood beside the stage, adjusting the microphone cable while trying to ignore the sting of cold on his cheeks. He wore his uniform jacket unzipped, revealing a simple sweater beneath, and his breath fogged as he glanced around the square. He was not used to this kind of attention, public events, ceremonies, speeches. But today wasn't about him. It was about a man who had nearly died alone in a snowstorm and the dog who refused to let him. It was about the town rediscovering something it had forgotten. Community. Dr. Elise Porter approached, carrying a clipboard and a thermos of coffee. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, and her blonde hair, usually tied tightly for hospital shifts, fell loosely around her scarf. You look like you're about to be interviewed on national television, she teased, handing him the thermos. Noah took it gratefully. I'd rather face another blizzard than give a speech. Relax, Elise said. Just speak from the heart. That always works. That's the problem, Noah muttered. The heart tends to talk too much. Elise smiled softly, her eyes lingering on him a moment longer before she turned to check the seating arrangement. Across the square, Sable trotted proudly beside Arthur Kane's wheelchair. Arthur wore a thick olive coat, a knitted hat pulled low, and a look of quiet pride that hadn't been seen on his face in years. His recovery had been steady, slow, careful, filled with physical therapy and long talks with Elise, but his spirit had returned faster than expected. He lifted a hand to wave at townspeople he knew, and several hurried over to greet him with warmth that brought a faint sheen of emotion to his eyes. Sable stopped every few steps to greet children who reached out to touch his fur. He accepted their affection with regal patience, tail swishing like a banner behind him. If he sensed that today's gathering centered around him, he gave no sign of pride, only calm devotion. When Arthur reached Noah, he extended a hand. "You made this possible," he said. Noah shook his head. "Sable did." "Yes," Arthur chuckled. "But you followed him. Not many people would have done that." Before Noah could reply, the mayor stepped onto the stage, Marjorie Whitlock, a stout woman in her 60s with silver hair and a voice that could quiet any room. "Ladies and gentlemen," she boomed into the microphone, "thank you for braving the cold to celebrate something remarkable." The crowd quieted. Even the dogs seemed to still. "In the past 8 weeks," the mayor continued, "the Guardian Paws Initiative has paired trained or rehabilitated canines with veterans and elders throughout Briar Ridge. What began as a single rescue during a blizzard has become a spark that lit the entire community." She gestured toward Arthur. "And none of this would have happened without Arthur Kane and his brave companion Sable." The crowd erupted in applause. Arthur nodded modestly, but Sable, startled by the noise, perked his ears and looked around as if making sure there was no threat. A few children giggled. Elise leaned toward Noah. "You're next." "Great," Noah whispered under his breath. When the mayor called his name, Noah stepped up to the microphone, feeling 100 pairs of eyes settle on him. He cleared his throat, gripping the cold metal stand. "I don't like speeches," he began. Laughter rippled through the crowd. "But if there's one thing worth talking about, it's what this town did." He paused, glancing at Arthur and Sable. "A few months ago, a dog ran into a hospital and asked for help the only way he knew how. A lot of things could have gone wrong that night, but they didn't, because this town showed up, because people cared, because loyalty doesn't disappear just because winter is harsh." Noah's voice softened. "Veterans in this community have given more than most people will ever know. Many return home and find themselves fighting a different kind of battle. Isolation, loss, pain that doesn't heal the same way bones do. But dogs—" He looked at Sable. "Dogs understand things we don't. They stay, they guard, they comfort. They remind us we're not alone." He stepped back from the microphone. "That's why Guardian Paws matters." Applause rose again, gentle, respectful, warm enough to thaw even the coldest air. After Noah stepped down, the event transitioned into a smaller ceremony. Children presented their drawings, crayon portraits of Sable, scribbled with snowflakes, hearts, and crooked but heartfelt labels like Hero Dog and Best Friend. Veterans shared brief stories of how their assigned dogs had changed their daily routines. Mourning, walks replacing lonely breakfasts, anxiety easing in the presence of a steady companion, nightmares softening when a warm, breathing presence slept at their feet. A retired firefighter choked up as he explained how the Labrador assigned to him nudged his hand during panic attacks. A widowed woman said her Malinois had become her reason to open the blinds. News crews interviewed volunteers. Local bakers brought pastries. Families took photos with Sable, who endured the attention with stoic patience. As the crowd thinned and the stage was dismantled, Arthur, Elise, Noah, and Sable made their way toward the edge of the square, where a police SUV waited to take Arthur back to his cabin. Elise linked her gloved hands behind her back. "That went beautifully," she said. "Better than I expected." "Not bad for someone who hates speeches," Noah replied. Arthur chuckled, his breath fogging the air. "Son, you might hate 'em, but you're good at 'em." Noah shrugged, embarrassed. They drove to Winterglass Cabin, freshly repaired and warmly lit, thanks to the fundraising Noah had organized after Arthur's hospitalization. The repairs weren't a miracle of kindness. They were a collection of practical contributions, neighbors offering lumber, veterans donating time, the station providing manpower, community work, honest and unembellished. Inside, the cabin glowed with firelight. Arthur settled into his armchair, the one Lucas had given him years ago. Elise and Noah shared a simple dinner with him. Stew, warm bread, quiet conversation. Memories of Lucas drifted between stories, bittersweet but no longer unbearable. After the meal, Arthur rested his hand on Sable's back. The dog leaned into him gently. "I think," Arthur said softly, "Lucas never left this place. Not really." His voice trembled, but not from sadness. "Sable has his eyes, and today, you two were his hands." Noah looked away, struck by the depth of the words. Outside the window, snow fell in a light, whispering curtain. Inside, the fire snapped warmly, casting amber reflections over Sable's watchful eyes. The celebration had ended, but something else had begun, a slow, steady heartbeat returning to a town that had forgotten the sound. Winter returned to Briar Ridge not as a threat, but as an old companion, its arrival softened by the memory of what the last year had brought. Snow clung to rooftops and piled along the pine-lined roads, but the town no longer felt frozen in spirit the way it once had. Through the months, something in Briar Ridge had shifted. Life had begun to pulse again, quiet, steady, unmistakable. On the outskirts of town, along the winding road toward Winterglass Lake, a man and his dog walked side by side. The man, Cal Bishop, a 50-year-old former Army medic, walked with the careful determination of someone relearning trust in his legs and in the world. Beside him moved Echo, a retired Malinois whose alert ears and sharp gaze never strayed far from Cal's pace. Cal had spent the first 5 months of the Guardian Paws initiative fighting nightmares, panic attacks, and the hollow ache that had defined his years since coming home. Echo had changed that. Not with miracles, not with fireworks, but with presence, steady, loyal, certain. Just behind them, on a separate path, an elderly widow named Marlene Tully walked with Gus, a clumsy Labrador who wagged so hard his back end seemed to fishtail with every step. Gus had become her daily reason to leave the house, rain, cold, or snow. Her neighbors said she laughed more loudly now, smiled more freely, and even baked again on weekends. And farther down the trail, a young veteran who rarely spoke above a whisper chatted softly to the shepherd assigned to him, words coming easier when directed at a creature who asked for nothing but sincerity. These scenes had become common, normal, beautiful. 17 pairs had been successfully matched over the past 12 months, each one a quiet testament to what a single night, a single dog, had set in motion. Officer Noah Garrett saw these pairs often during his patrols. Sometimes he stopped to greet them. Other times he simply watched from afar, letting the sight warm a part of him he rarely acknowledged. Tonight, he was not on patrol. Tonight he was driving through the snowy forest toward Winterglass Cabin, the headlights of his SUV sweeping across trees draped in white. The snow was falling lightly, soft flakes swirling lazily, as if the sky were tired of storming and chose instead to whisper. When the cabin came into view, its windows glowed golden through the dusk. Smoke curled from the chimney, shadows moved inside. Noah parked, stepped out into the crisp air, and took a moment to appreciate what had changed. 1 year ago, Arthur Kane had nearly died here. 1 year ago, a German shepherd had run into a hospital, dragging half a broken wheelchair. 1 year ago, hope had been scarce. Now, the cabin radiated life. He knocked once and let himself in. Warmth enveloped him instantly, carrying the scent of pine logs and something savory simmering on the old stove. Arthur Kane, stronger and healthier than anyone expected for a man of 73, sat in his familiar armchair. His spectacles rested low on his nose as he read a worn book, and the fire painted his silver hair with amber streaks. Recovery had not been easy, months of therapy, careful monitoring, and persistent determination. But Arthur had approached every challenge like the Marine he had once been. At his feet lay Sable, his once battle-scarred shepherd, now showing the earliest signs of age around the muzzle. His fur had softened, his posture mellowed, but his eyes remained sharp, always watching, always guarding. Across the room, Dr. Elise Porter arranged bowls on the small wooden table, sweeping her loose blonde hair behind one ear. She wore a cozy forest green sweater instead of hospital scrubs, and her cheeks glowed softly in the firelight. She had become a familiar presence here, and a comfortable one. "You're late," she teased as Noah entered. "I'm never late," he replied, removing his gloves. "You just live on hospital time." Elise smirked. "Hospital time is superior. We measure life in minutes." "And I measure it in snowstorms," Noah countered. "Last year proved that." Arthur chuckled from his armchair. "You two bicker like old friends." Elise shrugged. "Maybe we are." Noah caught her eyes for a moment longer than necessary. Something unspoken rested there, soft, patient, unhurried. They didn't need to name it. Not yet. Dinner was simple: stew, warm bread, and quiet conversation. But simplicity had always suited them. They talked about Arthur's latest physical therapy milestone, about the dogs recently paired with new veterans, about the town's plans for expanding Guardian Paws next spring. When the meal ended, they moved to the fireside. Arthur winced slightly as he shifted in his armchair. Sable nudged his leg with gentle concern. "I'm fine," Arthur assured him, patting his head. "Just old bones." Noah sat on the leather sofa, Sable choosing to lie directly between him and Elise, as if declaring himself the official mediator between their closeness. Elise rolled her eyes and scratched Sable's ears. "You're spoiled," she murmured to the dog. Sable accepted the accusation proudly. Outside, the world was quiet, a gentle snow drifting past the windows, settling into soft mounds around the porch. Inside, the fire cracked softly, painting the walls with flickering amber. It was Arthur who broke the silence first. He leaned forward, eyes reflecting the flames. "You know, this year gave me something I never expected to have again." Noah tilted his head. "What's that?" "A definition of family that doesn't hurt to speak." Sable shifted closer, resting his head on the old man's knee. Arthur stroked his fur slowly, reverently. "For a long time," he continued, "I thought Lucas took everything with him when he died. My pride, my purpose, my home, and this old dog. He was the last piece of my son I had left. When Sable disappeared, I thought that meant the story was over." Arthur's voice trembled slightly, but his eyes were warm. "But then he came back, and then you two showed up, and then the whole town stood behind us." He glanced between Noah and Elise. "Lucas is gone. That part will never change. But love doesn't vanish. It shifts. It finds new forms, new people." He smiled, a small, wise smile weathered by time, but bright with acceptance. "Tonight, I realized something. Sable fulfilled Lucas's final command. Protect the weak. He did that. He still does. But now—" Arthur paused, tears glistening faintly. "Now he has a new mission. To remind us that love never dies. Not truly. It just waits for the right moment to return." The room was silent except for the fire. Elise placed a hand gently on Arthur's arm, her expression soft with emotion. Noah swallowed the tightness in his throat, looking at Sable, older now, but steadfast, illuminated by the flickering glow. Outside the window, snow continued its slow descent, drifting like a blessing across the quiet world. Elise leaned back into the sofa, her shoulder brushing Noah's just slightly. Not enough to demand attention, enough to acknowledge connection. Sable shifted contentedly between them, the living bridge that had brought them all to this moment. On the mantel above the fireplace sat a single framed photograph, taken earlier that winter, showing Arthur, Sable, Noah, and Elise standing together beneath the falling snow, smiles soft, eyes bright. The lake behind them frozen in serene stillness. A family not formed by blood, but by storm, courage, and a German shepherd who refused to surrender. Snow fell, fire glowed, hearts healed. And in Briar Ridge, miracles didn't arrive with thunder. They arrived quietly, faithfully, 1 year at a time. Sometimes God's miracles do not arrive with thunder or bright light. Sometimes they come quietly through a loyal dog who refuses to give up through the kindness of a stranger, or through the strength we discover only when love calls us to act. In our daily lives, we face storms of our own moments when the world feels heavy and hope seems far away. But this story reminds us that God never leaves us alone. He works through simple acts of courage, through compassion we did not expect, and through people He places on our path at exactly the right time. If this journey touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a reminder that faith still moves mountains. Leave a comment to tell us your thoughts, and remember to subscribe for more stories of hope and courage. May God bless you and your family with peace, protection, and strength every single day. And if you feel grateful for the quiet miracles in your life, type Amen in the comments.